Thursday hang on Birds 365. We appreciate you streaming in with the Mac and Mac guys. Go ahead and hit that like button. You got to like it. John Stolnis. Of course you have to hit the like button. Do so immediately. From Bleeding Green Nation and the Eye on the Enemy podcast, John Stolnis joins us. John, how you been enjoying free agency?
It's been a ride, hasn't it? I mean, they haven't been quiet. It's been interesting. There's lots to talk about.
They're never
absolutely.
quiet, John.
No,
That's
indeed.
the beauty of this team.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with CJ because that was probably the most interesting part. So I want to give you three options and then fill in the percentages.
Okay.
When you talk about CJ Gardner-Johnson and what happens. Number one would be he just overvalued himself on the markets. Number two would be the personality. People have talked about that, the big personality. Maybe the Eagles got a little fed up with throwing Jonathan Gannon under the bus, tweeting and deleting, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And then the third would be just we in Philadelphia overvalued the guy as a player because of the interceptions and the splash plays.
You know, it's funny. I think all of those things are a factor, and I would kind of weight them all pretty evenly. I'd say like a third, because I do think there is a fair amount to all of that. We were in such desperate need for a safety in training camp last year when GJ arrived. It felt like, oh, we've got the last piece, we've got the final piece to the puzzle, and he did make those splash plays, and we've seen Eagles secondary players these last few years that have failed to capitalize on opportunities. So it was at least good that he was capitalizing on opportunities when they presented themselves. And then when he got hurt, it really seemed like it was a pretty damaging injury. We were looking forward to him coming back. Reed Blankenship played pretty well in his absence, but getting him back on the field for the playoff run, I thought was a good thing. But there's a chance we overvalued him because the need at safety felt like it was so great when they made the trade for him. So that's the first thing. The second thing is during the course of the season, we didn't hear a whole lot from Gardner-Johnson in terms of, running his mouth or tweets that he had to delete, which, by the way, don't be a tweet deleter. If you're gonna tweet, like, keep it up, man. Unless you tweeted something factually inaccurate and then you own it in the next tweet, then don't do that, man. Think before you hit the send button.
Yeah.
But that can be an issue, and I know that was the reported concerns was you sign him to a multi-year deal, he suddenly maybe feels freer to speak out and to tweet out and all that other stuff, and then you've got a headache on your hands. So that might have been part of it, but it does seem like they wanted him back and that they were willing to deal with all of those things for a number. And it certainly sounds like they have a certain amount of money allocated for the different positions on the field or the different spots on the field. And once he turned down their initial offer, they moved on to Bradberry and they moved on to inking in Slay. And then even for $8 million on a one-year deal, for a team that's as cap-strapped as the Eagles are, that's still a significant chunk of the cap for a player that maybe they are not 100% in love with. I think if he were a guy who they loved, they might have done that. But it does sound like that there was a little bit of pumping the brakes for $8 million for him.
And don't know if you saw it. Our buddy Marcus Hayes wrote a good article in the Inquirer a couple of weeks ago talking about how Denard Wilson, the former DB coach here now with the Ravens, kept that room in order, that there were a lot of big personalities in that room, and he kept it at times from blowing up and getting itself in trouble. Of course, he moved on, and the Eagles, I don't want to say pushed him out the door, but they made it easy for him to leave without giving him the defensive coordinator position. Do you think that was part of it? That they said, listen, we kept it under control. John Stolnis just said on Birds 365, it wasn't all that bad during the year. CJ didn't blow himself up during the 17-game regular seasons. Well, maybe that was because of Denard Wilson. Do you think the Eagles said, yeah, we walked the tightrope this year, and we probably wouldn't be able to do it again with CJ?
Yeah, it's possible. If Denard Wilson was laying on top of a grenade all season long, I mean, that certainly could be a reason why they decided not to bring him back. And that, it doesn't, and maybe they didn't want to saddle the new defensive coordinator with an issue like that as well. I mean, that's, if you bring Sean Desai in, the job's going to be challenging enough with losing all the players that you're going to lose. And if you're dealing with somebody who's going to make waves in the locker room, that can be an issue. Not knowing exactly what Denard Wilson, how he handled GJ last year. And I think GJ understanding he was playing for a new contract, thinking he was going to get a multi-year deal, was on his best behavior. So all those factors come into play. And, it is unfortunate. It's head scratching. Would I have rather seen them bring CJ GJ back for $8 million than sign Fletcher Cox for $10 million or whatever it was that he signed for? Yes. But once the die was cast, it really couldn't be re-rolled again.
But talking about the splash plays, and I'll bring the draft and Bijan Robinson, because that was a story this week because he was in for a visit. People like splash plays. It makes sense, right? Fantasy football, touchdowns, interceptions, points, blah, blah, blah. But you bring up Fletch. There's some talk that maybe, John, they're, bringing back the band again. This happened in 2017. Maybe Howie's talked about his loyalty to certain players, maybe goes a little bit too far. But you talk about the core four of this team, the so-called core four. Where are they? Jason Kelsey, Lane Johnson, Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, offensive line, defensive line. Not as sexy, but this entire sort of foundation of this era of Eagles football, which is pretty good. I know people are disappointed there aren't more Super Bowls, but think about that. There's only one in franchise history. It's a pretty good group as a whole. Why does every spring everybody go down that route? Is it just human nature?
To value the lines, or to
no, I'm saying the splash plays, whether it's CJ's interceptions, whether it's Bijan, dreaming about what he can add to this offense versus the sustained success of what the Eagles do,
right?
Building on the offensive and defensive lines.
Yeah, no, and because the splash plays get the attention, that's what gets the highlights. That's what you remember from a season. And to be fair, in past seasons, before really A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith got here, the offense was exceedingly difficult to watch. In the last couple of years of Carson Wentz being here, it was pulling teeth moving the ball down the field. It just felt like it was such a struggle to get anything happening. And so there was a severe drought of splash plays. And on defense, if you're not getting splash plays, defenses typically are on the field for a really long time, unless you've got a front four like the Eagles had this year, where you're sacking the quarterback and you're able to get the ball back that way. But the splash plays a lot of times are what separates the great teams from the middle of the pack teams. Look at the Giants. The Giants, they can kind of move the football, but there's a cap on how good that offense can be with the talent they have there. Whereas with the Eagles, they can jump, and all of a sudden you've got Jalen Hurts connecting 65 yards. I mean, look in the Super Bowl when the Eagles were down 8, all of a sudden you hit Devontae Smith for a big splash play to get you down to the 1 yard line, and all of a sudden you're in business. So the splash plays are really helpful, but you're right, they are predicated on stability along the line. So I'm a big balance guy in life, just in general, balancing all kinds. And I think you need to strike a balance in football with having enough players on your team that can generate the splash plays, but also making sure that you're not doing that at the expense of making sure your offensive lines and your defensive lines have depth, that they're consistent, and that they're stable. And I think the Eagles are trying to walk that fine line with very limited cap space this year. And they're going to have to hit on some guys in the draft to fill both of those roles. I think you're going to need to find a couple of draft guys that can make a splash play, and you're also going to need to help you with depth and get some guys who can be consistent performers down the road.
JS, I know it's kind of boring. You were talking about how splash plays grab everybody's attention. Oh, we all agree on that. And signing someone from another team always grabs attention. Just retaining your own players isn't near as sexy as taking someone off someone else's team. And they've brought back some very good players, and that's why I still think they're the favorite to go to the NFC. But they've lost players and others as well. What's the biggest loss the Eagles have suffered so far this offseason, in your mind?
I think it's Hargrave. I don't think there's a whole lot of debate about that. I mean, it's funny. I wrote about this week. You would think that losing a running back that piled up 1,200 yards and 11 touchdowns on the ground, more people would be talking about that loss. But people seem to be okay with Miles Sanders leaving, and I feel like behind this offensive line and with the offense this team has, I'm not overly worried about it. So I feel like Javon Hargrave, you're asking Jordan Davis and Milton Williams, and I guess to a degree Fletcher Cox as well, to pick up the slack for Hargrave, who in the 3 years he was here was a monster in the middle, getting to the quarterback at the defensive tackle position. And those guys are really rare. There's a reason he was the #1 free agent on the market this offseason. It really hurts that he went to San Francisco, because as we saw in the NFC Championship game, if you stop Bosa, you can largely slow down the 49ers defense. But in that case, now you've got a guy in the middle who generates his own pressure. He doesn't rely on the edge rushers crashing and just cleaning up the trash. He creates his own pressure in the middle of the field. So I think that's going to be the biggest loss. That's going to be the hardest for them to replace. I expect them to address the position in the draft, but they're not going to get another Javon Hargrave type season out of any of the guys who are currently on the roster, I don't think, unless we're going to see a big jump from Jordan Davis or a big jump from Milton Williams. I don't see it. I don't know how they replace it. I don't know what they do scheme-wise to make up for that, but they're going to have to figure that out, because them losing him, I think, was by far the biggest loss.
Silver lining, I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit. The Eagles aren't good against the run in general, mainly because they don't care about the run. Right. And they're probably right for the most part. I always joke, nobody cares about the run, offensively or defensively,
until Isaiah Pacheco goes for what he did in the second half of the Super Bowl. Then all of a sudden people realize, maybe we should stop the run.
Yeah. As good as Javon was as a pass rusher, he wasn't a good run defender as a defensive tackle. So there's no way. I mean, I put Jordan Davis aside. He's got to be a better player, but he plays a different position. Milton Williams is going to be the guy to get a lot of Javon Hargrave's snaps. You're not going to be the same pass rusher. He's just not. Even with his athleticism, as you mentioned, put Aaron Donald to the side. I mean, Javon's in the conversation for being the best interior pass rusher in the NFL. You're not going to get that from Milton Williams.
Yeah.
He's probably going to be better against the run. And, if my linebackers are Nakobe Dean and Nicholas Morrow, and my edge rushers Hassan Reddick, who looks like a wide receiver when you see him standing there, I mean, maybe having somebody in the middle can muck up the running game a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit more important than we think. Am I going too positive there?
No, I think there's a fair amount there to grab a hold of. I mean, for sure, you would want to do better against the run, and we'll see what Sean Desai's philosophy is on this. Whether he's more willing to commit to the run, whether he's more willing to run blitz on occasion when in obvious running situations. The problem with doing that is that, at least with Jonathan Gannon's defense, it was almost totally reliant on the front four getting pressure on the quarterback. If they weren't doing that, offenses had little difficulty moving the football on Jonathan Gannon, at least until they got into the red zone. And generally speaking, against the non-elite quarterbacks, they were able to hold teams to 3 points or get the splash play like we were talking about. But I think if you don't have that front four generating that kind of pass rush, and Javon Hargrave was a huge part of that. It's going to be harder to see how they can generate the sacks that they were able to generate last year. And that was such a huge part of what they do. And this defense is still very incomplete. I mean, I don't think we've got our starting linebackers yet, both of them anyway. I know Morrow will see exactly what his role is going to be, but I know maybe he's the starter, maybe he isn't. The safeties, I think there's still a lot of work to be done there. So we don't know exactly what this is going to look like yet, but I think you're right in that you might get some better success against the run. But in order for this defense to really work, unless Sean Desai is going to change things up and blitz more or have some more exotic plays with the defensive line, they're going to struggle to generate pass rush without Javon Hargrave in there, at least up the middle.
All right, JS, let me give you an alternative to your Javon Hargrave biggest loss theory, which is probably right, but I'm just going to go in a different direction. Certainly, he's the best player that they lost. I'm a huge Edwards fan. I love the Kobe Dean. CJ was a talented player, all other things aside. Here's what I'm nervous about. I think they could miss Shane Steichen, the play caller, more than anything else, comparing one season to the next. Sorry, Brian Johnson. You may do a better job than Shane Steichen, but I haven't seen it. We haven't seen it in the NFL level. He was an okay play caller on the collegiate level. That's different calling plays in the NFL. That scares me a little bit going into the season, and I think they might actually have a tougher time replacing Shane Steichen than any of the players they lost. Am I overreacting?
I think that's fair. I don't think you're overreacting. I do take some solace in the fact that this is Nick Sirianni's offense, and a lot of times the game plan is put together with Sirianni's direction. Now, you're right; the in-game play calling is a huge part of it, and there's a reason Shane Steichen was highly sought after, and why I think most people believe he's going to be a very good head coach in the NFL is his ability to call plays. He really did seem to have a rhythm all season long, knowing how to use Jalen Hurts and when to use the run, when to dial up the big play. So yeah, that's a huge question mark, whether or not Brian Johnson can do it. I do think that, it may not be beautiful right off the bat. There's going to be some growing pains. But at the end of the day, I'm not as worried about it. I don't think maybe as you are, or maybe as some other people are, because I think Johnson seems like a very competent coach. I know obviously the quarterback trusts him. Nick Sirianni trusts him, and it's a collaborative effort, at least up until game day. Until once the ball kicks off and they start calling plays, and I'm sure Nick Sirianni is in the headset with suggestions and whatever. So, this is one of those wait and see things for me. I'm willing to let it play out and kind of see how it goes. But it's a concern. There's no doubt about it. Whenever you lose a guy who was as talented a play caller as Steichen, there's no guarantee you're going to get somebody who's as good on the other side of it.
Yeah, and I've mentioned that before. I agree with Jody. I think people underestimate how good Shane was. He just has a feel for it. But I will say this, I'm not as concerned because the Eagles are just going to out-talent people on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, they have so many playmakers. The offensive line, if it's not number one, with the move away from Isaac to Cam Jurgens, it's still going to be top 5. It's still going to be one of the best offensive lines in football. We'll see how the backfield shakes out in theory, if he could ever stay healthy. And maybe it's time for Rashad Penny to get some luck and he does stay healthy. And I think he would be an actual better fit if he could stay on the field. Now, that's a big if. They might draft somebody. I think any running back is going to be relatively effective behind that offensive line. So we'll go back to the defense, John. There are more changes on the defense. We talked about Sean Desai. If Jonathan Gannon was back, if Javon Hargrave was back, if CJ Gardner-Johnson was back, I don't think they would have had the season they had this year from a statistical standpoint. You mentioned the sacks. They're not getting 70 sacks. Right. Even if Javon, they're not getting 70 sacks.
Right.
So there's going to be a regression to the mean, even if everybody was back, and now you've lost 5 starters. I'm really concerned about the defense and poor Sean Desai from the standpoint of the expectations are out of whack. So he's not only got to deal with all the turnover, John, he's got to deal with these unrealistic expectations. That's going to be difficult.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Are the expectations going to be unrealistic, though, understanding all the players that they've lost? I mean, I feel like I feel like
Eagle fans will move right past that. You'll acknowledge it. I'll acknowledge it. Yeah, the Eagle fans might not.
I'm new here, I guess. Yeah, it's very naive. I'll speak for myself then. I'm not expecting the defense to do what it did last year, but I think that's one of the reasons I'm actually more optimistic that the defense can weather this without Jonathan Gannon, because I think we know what Jonathan Gannon would have done. And I don't, because he was so reliant on that front four to get pass rush and for that, his defensive scheme to work, understanding that, of course, you're not going to generate that kind of pass rush again, that you're not going to get those kinds of results again. I'm not sure what other tricks he has in the bag when that's not working. We kind of saw that in the Super Bowl. He doesn't really have a whole lot of other things that he can go to or that he felt comfortable going to when the front four wasn't getting home. So with Sean Desai, I feel more comfortable with the unknown here, because I don't know if he will try some different things. If he is going to figure out different ways to get pressure on the quarterback, or if he is going to force quarterbacks to do something different, to funnel the ball outside the numbers a little bit more than Jonathan Gannon made them do. if Sean Desai is going to force quarterbacks to throw the ball against Slay and Bradberry and Maddox and really use that advantage that they have instead of letting them pick the defense apart underneath against the linebackers and the safeties. I'm concerned about the defense. There's no doubt about there's a talent drain. I also believe Howie Roseman is going to continue to add pieces and that this defense is nowhere near the finished product that it looks like right now. And with Sean Desai, I'm hopeful that it's just going to look a little different and we're going to see things differently than we saw with Jonathan Gannon. And again, until we get closer to training camp and we see who's on the field and we get a sense of what Desai wants to do, I'll wait and see on that as well.
John, we all get now focused during the offseason on what the Eagles are doing, what tunnel vision on what the Eagles are doing.
Yeah.
By the way, a couple of teams in the division have actually had okay off seasons. And I think the Cowboys are the biggest one. They're certainly the closest in the rearview mirror to the Eagles at adding Stephon Gilmore for a day 3 pick and Brendan Cooks for a day 3 pick. Not bad out of Jerry, the general manager down there in Dallas. I'm not saying they've caught the Eagles, but they've narrowed the distance between themselves and the Eagles. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think you have to say that when you combine what the Eagles have lost to what the Cowboys have gained. I think last season a lot of Cowboys fans were frustrated by the inactivity of the team and the shoulder. Jerry Jones said, "Yeah, everything's cool. We're good," and not understanding. And we underestimated too what Jalen Hurts was going to be this year. We didn't expect the Eagles to leapfrog the Cowboys necessarily in terms of talent, but I think they're close. Certainly, they've done a lot to help their receiving core. The defense remains strong, so remains to be seen what Gilmore has left in the tank. But he played well last year, and coupling him with Trayvon Diggs, I think it's an interesting conversation. Who has the better cornerback duo in the division? Whether it's Gilmore and Diggs or Slay and Bradberry, that's kind of a fun conversation. The quarterback comparison is a fun conversation. It's funny, you ask anybody to list their top 5 or top 10 NFC quarterbacks, and Jalen Hurts is at the top, and then after that there's a whole wide range of different possibilities for next year, but I think Dak has to be number 2 or number 3. So there's going to be that closeness between these two teams. There is absolutely a scenario where the Cowboys leapfrog the Eagles this year. I mean, we've seen that in this division since 2005. That teams don't win this division 2 years in a row. So I don't think they have, and I think the Eagles will continue to add this offseason and remain the better team with the more competitive roster. I think the coaching staff is also better than what they have in Dallas. But that being said, Dallas always plays Philadelphia tough. Things happen, stuff happens, and the Cowboys have absolutely improved themselves this offseason. Hats off to them. They saw the Eagles hit the Super Bowl last year and decided, no, that's not happening again, and they're being more aggressive than they have been in recent off seasons.
At John Stolnis, follow John on Twitter, bleedinggreennation.com. Also, our producer Xander's fired up about the Phillies. Get your Phillies news from John as well. I'll end it with you, John, with the players the Eagles have added. And there's a couple themes. Obviously, they want to go cheap because they want to go those 20. They want to make sure they get their 4 2024 compensatory picks. So we understand that. Yeah. They've also, tried to pick talented players that maybe have had some injury history. Rashad Penny and Justin Evans, former second-round pick. Reedy Williams, former second-round pick. Nick Borrow, a little bit outside of that box as an undrafted free agent, but he's had some injury issues as well. Are the Eagles? I know there's one team that has a better medical staff, and that's the Saints, because they're saving people's lives. That's the third time. John Dorenbos, Nick Fairley. Now they found poor Foster Moreau, and good luck to him, diagnosed with lymphoma, can't say it. Are the Eagles too, do they have a little bit too much hubris when it comes to their medical staff? They had a great season when it came to, player games lost and, the maintenance days and the load management. It all worked out beautifully. But I do think there's a little bit of luck there. And Rashad Penny, I've said, you know what, that guy, he's due for some good luck. So I'm pretty optimistic about him staying healthy because he's due. He's still a young guy. And we'll see how things shake out. But do you think they're a little bit too haughty when it comes to that kind of stuff?
I think right now, I mean, you see this in other sports too. It's like you're looking for guys who can come back off an injury and have talent, but and can play well. I would rather the Eagles go in that direction than sign aging free agents on cheap deals, because I'm all for upside when it comes to something like a Rashad Penny type signing. I'd rather them go out and get him than go out and get some 33-year-old veteran running back on a 1-year deal or something like that. And you hope that your medical staff, which has shown that they've gotten much better since the Doug Peterson medical staff days, when we were losing player games to injuries more than any other team in the NFL, you're not going to be as healthy as you were last year. I mean, that's another regression that we're going to have to anticipate in 2023. But I think that with these guys that are coming back off of injury, they showed at least last year that they were healthy. I mean, for the Penny aside, the defensive ads, they played a majority of games last season. So it's not as if they're coming off an ACL injury that forced them to miss all of last year, and they're hoping the medical staff can rehabilitate them. They're getting some guys who at the early part of their years had showed promise, got hurt, last year played pretty well or played more, and are looking now to kind of springboard that into the next few seasons. I think that's a smart thing to do. You hope that these players, I think the idea is these players are coming in healthy, and then you're just trying to maintain them through, like you said, load management, through workload. And for all the hemming and hawing and hand-wringing last year in the summer about how little the Eagles were practicing, they emerged as one of the healthiest teams in the NFL. So I think they've earned a little bit of that trust with these guys, and we'll see how it shakes out. But I think it's a smart way to build a team when you've got cap issues.
JS, my last question to you is a two-parter. And we've had you on Birds 365. I've had you on my other shows. I don't know that I've ever addressed this with you before. Roger Goodell signing a contract extension with the National Football League. Is that good for the Eagles? Is it good for the National Football League? Roger Goodell is one of those lightning rod kind of guys who people seem to have a strong opinion about. I do. I've shared it before. I'll share it again if need be. What's your opinion on Roger Goodell and the NFL staying under his auspices for the next additional 6, 7, 8 years?
Well, if you're looking at the business side of it, I get it. The NFL has never been healthier. It's never been stronger. I think he's completely tone deaf when it comes to PR, when it comes to handling player suspensions, when it comes to how much time does Calvin Ridley get suspended for versus Deshaun Watson, and you look at the comparison and the things that they did. I mean, it's just it's hard to wrap your head around some of the decisions that are made by Goodell and by the front office and league officials. And there certainly are things that about the NFL that I don't like the way they handle a number of different issues from a front office standpoint. As far as how it affects the Eagles, I don't know that whether it's Goodell or another commissioner, whether or not there's a real impact on Philadelphia in particular. But if there is, happy to hear reasons why. But yeah, if any commissioner, I struggle to think of a commissioner who would be any better. Major League Baseball's commissioner is kind of the same way. These commissioners are all in the pockets of the owners. They don't look out, generally speaking, for what's best for the sport. They look out for what's best for the owners of the sport because they're hired by the owners. Yeah. And so it's hard to say, well, if it wasn't Goodell and you get this guy in there, they're going to be the bastion of what's best for the sport. I just don't think it works that way.
That's true, John. It's like everyone says he's terrible, insert name. Well, who's not going to be terrible in that
He's not going to be terrible.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of the beast with that job. I mean, if you really had a commissioner of a sport should be an ombudsman. They should be a person who is looking out for what's best for the sport, whether that's in the best interest of the owners or the Players Association or the fans. That's just not how it works. No. I think we all understand that. So,
And I was glad to hear you say it's not everybody hates Philadelphia. because I get enough of that on the phone. Oh, Goodell stinks.
But,
he doesn't like the Eagles.
Yeah,
and your
I
proof of that is
will.
what, other than because you say so? Oh, I don't know. He just doesn't like the Eagles. Yeah,
I will, and I hate when I have to defend Roger Goodell, but one of the things which I think most people don't understand, especially when it comes to punishments, because those are so high profile. You mentioned Calvin Ridley. Some of the punishments are structured, like the gambling punishment. That's collectively bargained. There's no wiggle room. Whereas the personal conduct issues, there's wiggle room. So, and I get it. Fans will say, well, Calvin Ridley gets suspended for a year and so with domestic violence. That's not Rodgers' fault. I hate that it's one is structured, one is not. And I don't, the union and the league have to get together to fix that. One has wiggle room, one doesn't. And that's really difficult to explain to people. It really is, because I've been trying to do it for over 2 decades.
And they just don't get it. Johnny, great stuff today. We appreciate you coming on board. Know full well we'll be asking you back well before the draft happens, because 5 weeks from today it gets underway. It'll be here before you know it. We'll get you up for some draft opinions. Appreciate you jumping in and joining us here today.
You bet, guys. Anytime. Thanks.
He
John.
is at bleedinggreennation.com and does a Great Eagle podcast, Eye on the Enemy. John Stolnis here with us on Birds 365. All right, Jody Mack coming back a little bit later. We'll get a more national view. Our buddy Mike Tanier from Football Outsiders is going to jump in. McMullen and McDonald coming back here on Birds 365 next.